on this edition of It's a Miracle. An hour after takeoff at an altitude of 37,000 feet, United Flight 232 was rocked by a sudden explosion.
If you have lost all hydraulics, translation is that you have no ability to steer your aircraft anymore in flight. Obviously a terrible situation.
Meet the heroes who helped turn a tragedy into a miracle. Then, a violent car collision leaves a man fighting for his life, until a mysterious lady in green arrives with a message. Was she an angel, or just a figment of his imagination? All this and more on It's a Miracle.
Oh, it's a miracle, happening to everyday people, changing their lives forever. It's a miracle.
Hello, I'm Richard Thomas. One of the things that I've learned here on It's a Miracle is that even in the most tragic situations, it's possible to find some good. And that certainly applies to our first story. We now take you back to one of the most unforgettable air disasters in recent history, United Airlines Flight 232 into Sioux City, Iowa. One of the reasons that this tragic crash remains so vivid in our minds today is that it was actually captured on videotape. The town of Sioux City, Iowa had joined forces for a disaster emergency preparation drill to simulate conditions and events that would surround a major airline crash. Local residents volunteered to play the parts of crash victims, while professional rescue workers, like Fire Chief Robert Hamilton, assessed the situation.
We looked at the response times to try to determine how long it would take us to actually extricate people, get them to a medical facility as soon as we possibly could.
While everyone understood the serious nature of such a disaster, not everyone was convinced that the drill was necessary, something that Nurse Barbara Small heard again and again.
We had some skeptical people out there thinking that we would never have a plane this large crash in Sioux City.
Matter of fact, I think it was the furthest thing from our mind at the point in time that we were actually preparing for and conducting the drills.
The people participating that day had no idea how important this drill would become and how soon all their preparation would actually be needed. And then, on July 19, 1989, United Flight 232 from Denver to Chicago began boarding at 12:20 p.m. Dennis Fitch, one of the passengers that day, changed flights at the last minute, boarding United 232 instead of taking an earlier flight from a closer gate. Dennis was a DC-10 instructor and United pilot returning home from a previous flight.
To get on the DC-10 is something I never will ever quite understand why. You could think of it as fate, luck, or God having me where he wanted me that day.
On board, the head flight attendant was Jan Brown Lohr.
It was summer season, it was families traveling, a lot of unaccompanied children.
Headed on a business trip was passenger Jerry Schemmel, who was also aware of the unusual number of children on board.
There were 50 kids on board that aircraft, including many infants, and especially it seemed around where I was. There was just an extraordinary number of youngsters, toddlers, as well as infants on board.
2-year-old Evan Sow was traveling with his mother to Chicago that day. And sitting not far from Jerry was 11-month-old Sabrina Michelson. The plane took off as scheduled at 12:45 p.m.
We took off from Denver under almost perfect conditions, 83 degrees when we left the airport, little if any wind, clear skies, and yeah, for the first hour of the flight, it was probably as smooth a ride as you could ever imagine.
And then, with the plane traveling at an altitude of 37,000 feet, there was a tremendous explosion.
This was so loud and so violent and came completely unexpected that there was just a tremendous amount of panic. The plane was vibrating, shaking and shuddering intermittently.
Jan Brown Lohr was immediately summoned to the cockpit.
I did my most casual, there's nothing wrong, walk up to the cockpit, thinking we obviously have an emergency.
Meanwhile, the captain tried to calm the terrified passengers.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain, Captain Haynes.
The first thing that Captain Haynes told us was that the number 2 engine he was having trouble with. And he said he has shut it down And he also said that the DC-10 is equipped to fly with the remaining 2 engines. When you have an explosion, what you think until that point is a bomb going off, and then the captain gets on and says he's having a lot of trouble controlling the aircraft, I think we all had a pretty good idea that something was seriously wrong inside the cockpit.
Now I open the door, and the enormity of the crisis hit me full force. Without anyone saying a word or doing anything, I just felt it. It just filled the air.
Jan was informed that the plane had lost all its hydraulics and told to immediately secure the cabin and prepare for an emergency landing.
As I stepped out the cockpit door and shut it behind me, I can remember thinking, oh God, please let me be someplace else. I have never known such fear, such terror in a lifetime.
The flight attendant that was working my side of the aircraft came by our seat row, and as she approached, I looked at her face, and it was very worried. I stopped her and said, Jan, please don't worry about this. This airplane flies fine on 2 engines. All we need to do is get to a lower altitude. We're going to be fine.
It's much worse than you think.
And she looked at me and said, oh no, Denny, the captain has told us that we have lost all our hydraulics. Now, the hydraulic system on the DC-10 is critical. If you have lost all hydraulics, translation is that you have no ability to steer your aircraft anymore in flight. Obviously, a terrible situation.
I'll go and check. Don't worry.
Being an experienced pilot, Denny immediately went to the cockpit to see if he could help.
The airplane was banking steeply to the right, and they were desperately trying to get the right wing back up. And he was having a terrible, difficult time doing that while he was still starting to fly the airplane with the wheel. Seeing that, I said, Captain, would you like me to do your throttles for you? And Al Haynes said, yes, do that. And we never trained for this. It was just thought not ever to happen. It couldn't happen.
Then he tried something that had never been done before. He attempted to steer the plane by manually adjusting the power to the engines.
More power, more power, more power, more power. Okay, right there, right there, right there.
In the previous 25 years, there had been some accidents due to loss of all flight controls in flight, which was our situation. There has never been a successful outcome to any of those events. In fact, 1,200 lives had been lost in the previous 25 years.
We are going to prepare for an emergency landing.
The only thought that follows that can follow it, is that you're going to die today. And the question to your mind comes, how long is it going to take before this airplane finally hits the Iowa soil and it's over? You're going to die this afternoon.
296 people's lives are being held in one man's hands. Will a miracle save them? The terror in the skies continues when It's a Miracle returns. When the citizens of Sioux City, Iowa came out in full force for an emergency disaster drill, no one knew that soon they would be repeating the drill, but this time for real. United Airlines Flight 232 to Chicago was in the air for only an hour when a giant explosion occurred. The plane had lost one of its engines and all of its hydraulic system, and now there was no way to steer the aircraft using the controls. Inside the cockpit, the crew, assisted by off-duty pilot Dennis Fitch, desperately tried to manually guide the plane toward the nearest airport in Sioux City, Iowa. In the cabin area, head flight attendant Jan Brown-Lohr was preparing the passengers for a crash landing.
I just could not share the fact that I thought that it was so serious that maybe we wouldn't survive. I was beyond that at that point. I just had this great concern for doing my job the best I could. These were wonderful passengers who were so attentive you could have heard a pin drop when I went through our emergency procedures.
My thoughts were, when are we going to hit and how hard are we going to hit? I remember thinking about my wife. I remember the last 3 words to my wife when she dropped me off the airport were, I love you. The physical image of my wife's face kind of popped into my head. I think I sort of said goodbye in that moment. I didn't think I'd ever see her again.
As word of the impending disaster spread, emergency ground crews began setting up. Nurse Barbara Small was already in position.
We had a half-an-hour warning to get ready. We knew it was a DC-10, so we knew there would be a lot of passengers on board. We estimated about 300. We had called our staffs in, physicians came in. This time the drill was real.
Dennis Fitch continued to manipulate the plane's gears by hand.
I had this overwhelming realization that I literally had 295 other lives in my two hands. They were all relying on me.
Fire Chief Robert Hamilton was monitoring the air-to-ground communications.
Flight control. We have no hydraulic fluid, which means we have no elevator control. I have serious doubts about making the airport.
They communicated to us that the hydraulics had been severed, that the pilot would probably not have any landing gear, and that they would have no brakes. And at that point, I became very concerned.
There was less than 5 minutes to impact.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain, Captain Hayes.
Captain Hayes got on the PA system and he told us that with about 30 seconds before touchdown, he was going to give us command to brace. And then he added to that, he said to folks, this is going to be rough. This is going to be rougher than anything you've ever been through. So please try to get ready as best you can. I think what that did was erase any doubts in anybody's minds about us landing safely and walking off that plane.
And those of you who have lap children, we're going to have to put them on the floor. We'll surround
I told the parents with lap children to place them on the floor at that time and to hold them down. Something that we had been trained in a classroom situation, but in finding myself actually saying this in a real-life situation, I couldn't believe that I was saying something as absurd as telling a parent to take their treasured child and place them on the floor. But that was pretty much all we had.
It was 2 minutes to touchdown.
We got within sight of Sioux City. We saw the closed runway, and amazingly, we were somewhat lined up on it. That's what we've been fighting for. Now we had a shot at landing this airplane where we wanted to.
Runway in sight. We'll be with you very shortly. Thanks a lot for your help.
But the plane was traveling too fast and approaching the runway too quickly.
Normally, I come in and whenever I touch down, the rate that I would be sinking to the runway would be about 100 feet a minute. We were going down at close to 2,000 feet per minute. Extraordinary numbers. We had no doubt in our minds that if we didn't stop this, that our survivability was going to be deeply in question.
Captain Haynes got on with a little over a half minute to go before we hit, and he said, all right, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Brace, brace, brace.
It was as if a breeze went over a field of wheat and all the passengers went into their brace positions and a whole cabin disappeared from view. I could tell that we were fairly close, and I guess my one thought was that maybe we'll make it, but I don't know what's going to happen next.
United Airlines Flight 232 is about to attempt a crash landing at the small Sioux City, Iowa airport. The crippled plane is flying with a damaged engine, no hydraulics to steer it, and no brakes. Miraculously, one of the passengers on board is an experienced pilot who has managed to keep the plane level by manually manipulating the gears. The disaster team is on the ground, ready and waiting, and praying for a miracle. The flight crew had prepared the passengers, instructing parents with small children to place them on the floor. Then, 30 seconds before impact, everyone was ordered into their brace positions.
United 232 Heavy, roger, sir. That's a closed runway. That'll work, sir. We're getting the equipment off the runway, and they'll line up for that one. I'll get it. At the end of the runway, it's just a wide open field, so, sir, so the length won't be a problem. Plane 19, he's coming down real fast down the south end.
We came in so fast and so hard that it was just like we dropped out of the sky and hit this runway. And immediately inside the cabin, there were bodies being thrown about. Some were still in their chairs, strapped in their chairs, but the chairs had come up.
And I could hear all this screeching metal, noises that were just so foreign that I had never heard before and hoped never to hear again.
The cockpit had snapped off the rest of the airplane, and we were now tumbling at 200 miles an hour through the soybean field.
Fire Chief Robert Hamilton continued to monitor the reports coming from the crash site.
I heard the on-scene report given by the assistant chief. He was quite hysterical. His report was that the plane had been totally destroyed. It's on fire. My initial reaction was, oh my God. Excuse me.
The survivors were beginning to make their way out of the burning plane.
It was so surreal. It was as if I could have been standing there saying, "Thank you for flying with us today." People were just calmly walking single file out of this wreckage. The mother of this little boy was heading back towards the wreckage. And she said, "I have to go back. My child is in there." And I said, "You can't go back." And then she just looked up at me and she said, "You told me to put my baby on the floor." And I did. And he's gone. It, to this day, gives me shivers because I know that I was going to have to live with those words for the rest of my life.
Tragically, the little boy, Evan Tsao, did not survive this devastating crash. But another child was still inside.
I took a couple steps after I got out of the cabin initially, and I heard the cries of a baby back inside the wreckage. And at that point, I just sort of stopped.
Without thinking about the danger, Jerry went back inside the burning wreckage, crawling on all fours to stay below the thick smoke.
It was really tough to see at that point. I remember telling myself, keep crying, I've got to hone in on this thing. And
luckily, the child's cries continued and led Jerry to a pile of rubble.
I pulled debris off, and there was a hole with the baby in it, still crying. I couldn't see her very well, but I could hear the crying, and I knew that she was right in front of me.
The baby, 11-month-old Sabrina Michelson, was alive and miraculously unharmed. Jerry quickly picked up the child, held her close to him, and ran for safety. 184 people survived Flight 232's fiery crash that day, but for most, the scars will remain forever.
Some short time later, CNN replayed that footage all over again, and I carefully watched it and saw United's insignia on the tail and realized, oh my God, that was us. Why am I alive? Why is anybody alive?
I can't explain physically how anybody could have survived that crash. I've seen the videotape, number one, and number two, I was inside that plane and I saw the chaos and I saw the destruction and the debris flying and the smoke and the fire and the bodies being thrown about. And then to look back on it today and think, almost 2/3 of us survived that thing. There's no other explanation than to say it was a miracle. I think there were a number of miracles that happened that day. I think miracle number one was that the cockpit crew was able to keep the plane going. I've had a lot of aviation experts tell me that we should have nosedived right there after that engine explosion.
But miraculously, Dennis Fitch had taken the wrong plane that day, and it was his unique knowledge of hydraulics that kept Flight 232 in the air.
It has now become very clear to me that I was there for a reason. You see, I'm just an ordinary pilot that had an extraordinary day. And so I believe that God put me there.
Was Jerry Schemmel also put on board that day to play a part in a miracle? And if he hadn't been there, would Sabrina Michelson have survived?
She is our miracle child, having flown into an overhead bin, and then Jerry actually found Sabrina and took her out. That was one of many miracles.
When I look back on it and realized exactly what had happened to that child, that she was sitting in row 11. When I picked her up, I'm guessing she was in row 26 or 27 without any injuries. I thought miraculous is the only way to explain it.
And what about the emergency drill, which so carefully prepared rescuers for this very situation?
It was a miraculous occurrence that we had this drill so close to a true air disaster that we had.
There's not a doubt in my mind that God was watching over that particular flight and, for whatever reason, prepared us as best he could for that particular day.
Even with all of the miracles that happened that day, we must not forget that 112 souls were lost during the crash of Flight 232, and it is especially the deaths of the children on board that continue to haunt Jan Brown lore.
I will consider it a miracle when infants are in their own seats, and it's ludicrous to have a plane load of passengers who have an element of safety with a seat belt, and yet we have infants under 2 who are allowed to ride on their parents' laps. And that leaves them free to fly through the cabin, which in essence is what 2 of those infants did. It will definitely be a miracle if the FAA will finally mandate what they should have mandated years ago, and that is that every passenger has the same chance at safety on an airplane with a seat belt.
If you're still not convinced that a miracle took place on board Flight 232, consider this. Since the crash, there have been several attempts under controlled conditions to test the methods that pilot Dennis Fitch used to keep the plane level. And what he achieved that day has never been duplicated. Never. We'll be back with more miracles right after this.
Coming up on It's a Miracle, a dangerous laser heart surgery is the last hope for a dying woman. But her health is not the only thing about to change. And a strange woman enters a dying man's hospital room, then mysteriously disappears. Was she real or just a dream? These stories and more on It's a Miracle.
When you think about accidents that happen in the water, you usually think about the ocean. But sometimes tragedy strikes in the most unlikely place and when you least expect it. Like the woman in our next story who was driving down the road in the safety of her own car, but ended up steering right into harm's way.
On a hot, sunny Sunday morning in South Florida, Caridad Perez, a recent Cuban immigrant, was getting her first driving lesson. Behind the wheel of her son's car, she was enjoying the newfound freedom of America. She would also be the beneficiary of an American miracle.
Okay? Mom, you're going towards the canal. Mom, you're going towards the canal. Hit the brake.
Confused by her son's unfamiliar English instructions, Caridad couldn't understand what he was trying to say. The car lurched out of control and into a canal. Although cars can float for a few minutes, sometimes allowing for escape, Caridad Perez was so panicked she couldn't get out of her seatbelt. Her son frantically tried to get her out, but it didn't help. The car continued going down. With all the water rushing in, she was in danger of drowning. Unable to help her, Caridad's son squeezed out through a window and swam to the surface, hoping to get help.
My mom's in a car! Help me!
Rescuers from the Dade County Fire Departments responded to an emergency call from witnesses at the scene of the accident.
We had confirmation, from the witnesses that there was a person still in the car. So we knew we had a victim. We knew we had to get her out. It was just a race against time.
Caridad could only stay underwater for a few minutes if she was going to survive.
Ted, the car's right there with the
At that point, Caridad had been trapped in her car for 5 minutes, and precious seconds were ticking away.
Visibility was about 2 feet. It was pretty poor. Basically we swam out to a trail of bubbles, went down, and we landed right in the back of the car.
Caridad was unconscious in her car under 10 feet of murky water. It would take a miracle for rescue efforts to succeed.
Once I got to the car
I kind of felt my way, got to the door, forced the door open, went in, and once you went into the car, I mean, it got completely black. It was like a black water dive, and proceeded to move forward to the driver. Felt that we had somebody there. I felt the person, and then I tried to pull her out, unsuccessfully the first attempt. And when I tried again, she didn't want to come. I thought she was trapped, or maybe her foot was caught in the pedal or something.
During that time, I swam around and I reached at the windshield and I pulled it back. And then I found the victim. I stuck my head inside the car. I had to stick my torso in there. And I kind of like came face to face with her.
And when I went to go pull again, she came free. And that was only because George Campo at the same time was through the front windshield, had his upper torso inside, and he cut the seatbelt with the cutter that we use. And that enabled her to get free. And once she just came up, I just got her out, and then George came around and gave me a hand, and then we just took her up to the surface.
The odds of Caridad pulling through were not on her side. On the average, victims don't survive after being underwater for more than 4 minutes. Caridad Perez was under for 8.
She was legally dead, and she's been down there, I believe it was more than 10 minutes.
Begin CPR, let's go. Count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1.
While the emergency team followed their standard procedures, there wasn't much optimism among them. But that didn't stop them from treating this like any other rescue. Caridad Perez was given the best chance to survive.
So the chances are survival are slim to none.
You know, most of the time you get people out, but they don't make it.
So you just have to think positive and hope for the best and pray for the best.
Miraculously, Dade County is one of the few fire departments in the United States that has rescue divers assigned to every response team. Add to that, state-of-the-art medical support equipment means that victims have a better chance to survive. Caridad Perez also had the advantage of a miracle.
You know, even I think the doctor in the emergency room didn't give much hope, you know. And but the next shift I called and they told me she was in the intensive care unit. And I spoke to the nurse that was taking care of her. And she told me that she had made this miraculous recovery.
So we went to go see her that same day, and she was up, breathing on her own, eating on her own, and it's a miracle.
Caridad made a complete recovery and had the opportunity to meet her rescuers.
My son has told me about you two men, how good you were to him and to me. The whole situation is so much that I can say thank you. But I know that thank you can never be enough.
Caridad Perez beat the odds, but was there an explanation for her survival?
You know, you can say maybe there was an air pocket. We didn't find no air pocket. You know, that's usually one of the explanations. It was just a miracle, I think.
It's people like the Water Rescue Team of Dade County, a group of volunteers from the Dade County fire stations, who make a difference in people's lives and helped Caridad Perez in her miraculous rescue. We'll be right back with more amazing stories when It's a Miracle continues.
Medical texts are full of accounts of patients who make unexplainable and amazing recoveries from life-threatening illnesses. But few of them are as mysterious as the one you're about to see. And we leave it to you to decide whether or not it was a miracle. July 5th, 1986. Joe Tucker of Albany, Georgia, is being rushed to the hospital for the second time in a month.
Lean your head back.
Having survived serious injuries in a car crash in June, Joe is now facing a complication that no one had expected.
Just hold your head back. We're almost there, sweetie.
And now, without immediate treatment, Joe could suffer severe brain damage or die. 5 weeks earlier, Joe's life had been nearly perfect. He was in good health, had a great job, and was engaged to be married in September to the woman of his dreams, Joyce Womack. But on June 13th, Joe was involved in a major traffic accident that nearly destroyed all their plans. The force of the impact threw Joe's head into the door of the cab, leaving him with a concussion and severe injuries to his back and spine. He was rushed to a local hospital, the same hospital where his fiancée Joyce worked as a nurse.
I was scared. I wasn't sure what kind of shape he was in, how bad were the injuries. Is he conscious? You know, will he know who I am?
Joyce, he's okay. He's okay. He's stable.
When Joyce finally entered the ER, Joe turned his head to look at her, and at that moment she felt that in spite of his injuries, he was going to pull through.
That's good.
But Joe's speedy recovery surprised even his doctor, John Testerman.
He seemed to do well from his skull fracture. The blood cleared up from behind his ear, and there didn't seem to be any residual problems from that. And so after about 3 weeks, we went ahead and discharged him from the hospital.
But a few days later, Joe began experiencing intense pressure inside his head and discovered a strange, clear liquid coming from his nose, accompanied by a fierce, pounding pain.
Hey, Joyce! Hey, Joyce!
Joe, what's going on?
Something's not right.
Come on, let's go. Let's go. You come sit on the bed, and I'll call the hospital. Stop it.
Within seconds, Joyce contacted Joe's doctor, and they were racing back to the hospital with Joe's life hanging in the balance. X-rays revealed a small hairline fracture at the base of Joe's skull, a direct result of his original accident, but with a far more dangerous consequence. He was losing spinal fluid, and he was losing it fast.
This is very dangerous because anytime fluid can leak out from around the brain, bacteria can go up that same hole and get up into the coverings around the brain and cause meningitis, or even form a brain abscess. If it's left untreated, it is a potentially fatal condition.
The prognosis was devastating. Joe was immediately scheduled for surgery, a surgery that was so delicate that it could leave him with serious physical side effects even if he managed to live through it. Joyce tried not to show Joe how frightened she was, but she knew she might be losing the man she loved forever. And so together, they made an important decision. Their marriage would no longer take place in September. It would happen now, in the hospital.
You'd marry me like this?
Yes, I would in a minute.
The entire hospital staff helped in the preparation, and on July 12, 1986, the ceremony proceeded as planned.
Joe was on a stretcher, but I guess standing up there saying our vows, I didn't feel like he was sick. It was just like we were on our own little world, saying our vows, and this was it. This was the beginning of my, my new life with this special person. Right at that moment, everything felt right. It was just perfect.
The plight of this young couple touched the hearts of friends and neighbors, and many in the small community showed their support by attending the event.
People that I didn't even know were coming up and telling me, hey, we're praying for Joe. We're praying for Mr. Tucker. Let him know that we're supporting him.
But there was one person whose prayers would change their lives forever. She arrived in Joe's room the night before the operation, long after visiting hours were over.
Mr. and Mrs. Tucker?
The Tuckers didn't recognize the woman.
You don't know me, but I've been sent here to pray for you.
We're just thinking she's one of the people from the church visiting that visits all the patients.
We ask that Joe be healed.
The woman told Joe that he would not require surgery the next day, that miracles do happen. The woman's words gave Joyce and Joe a sense of peace and comfort, but before they could thank her, she was gone.
Let me go find out who she is.
And when Joyce ran to catch her, she was in for the surprise of her life.
When I asked the nurse, I said, did you happen to see which way the lady that just came out of Joe's room in a green dress went? And she says, nobody come out of your room. I thought, well, that's odd. I said, well, a lady just left, you know, that came in the room to visit, and I missed her leaving. And then she said again, she said, well, I didn't see anybody come out of the room.
Who was this mysterious lady in green? Was she real, or had they just imagined seeing her? The next morning, they received their answer. When the doctor arrived for a pre-op checkup, the fluid had miraculously stopped flowing.
This looks really good. It looks really good.
And I said, it has stopped. I'm not leaking no more. He's made me shake my head left and right. It's stopped. And Joe says, well, you remember what that lady said?
She said there wouldn't be a need for surgery. And that's when Joe and I realized she was right. She knew something.
We're going to do a couple more tests in a few hours, and if everything works out, you may be going home tonight.
You're kidding.
I'm not kidding you.
You're not kidding me. I thought, you know, wow, I'm supposed to have surgery at 7, but in a couple of hours I can go home. No, this is perfect. I don't want to see this place again.
Joe Tucker was released from the hospital later that day. And in the 12 years since then, he has never had a recurrence of the problem. He has also never been able to find the woman who came into his room that night and brought with her the miracle of his recovery.
I don't know if she was an angel or not, but to me she was, because I know I didn't have to have surgery. Nothing went wrong.
Did she come from heaven? Did she come from Albany? That doesn't matter. What's important is the message of comfort. There's no doubt in my mind that God is still in the healing business.
Today, Joe and Joyce Tucker still live and work in Albany, Georgia. Joe has completely recovered, but not a day goes by that they don't wonder about the mysterious lady in green who visited the hospital room that night and the miraculous healing that followed. When we come back, we'll show you more amazing stories that defy explanation as It's a Miracle continues.
Even though medical science has discovered new methods to heal a diseased heart, it sometimes takes a miracle to mend a broken one. That's what the woman you're about to meet will discover when she takes part in an experimental heart treatment with some very unexpected and miraculous results. In October 1994, Eppie Simpson was diagnosed with a rare genetic heart disorder. Over the next 2 years, this once active woman would undergo hundreds of procedures to save her life, including 17 heart catheterizations. The operations left her weak, her spirit depleted. And then in 1996, Eppie's heart was broken. Her husband died unexpectedly, and in her grief, she suffered a massive heart attack. From that point on, she was in constant pain, enduring 2 bypass operations and living on painkillers and drugs. By the time she arrived at the Cardiovascular Research Center at Johns Hopkins Hospital, under the care of Dr. John Resar, Eppie was desperate, but there was very little hope that her condition would improve.
So how have you been feeling?
Not good.
Eppie had frequent episodes of chest pain, really with very minimal activity and often at rest. So as you could imagine, this type of constant chest pain is severely disabling, preventing her from doing any of the normal activities you and I would routinely perform.
The only option left was a dangerous experimental surgery using lasers to drill new channels in Eppie's heart to improve her blood flow and hopefully save her life.
Hi, Harold. Good to see you again.
At the same time, another heart patient was looking for a miracle in his life. Harold Carmichael had also suffered a massive heart attack, and during emergency surgery, a balloon used to open his artery burst because of extreme calcium blockage. Harold was put on a diet of nitroglycerin pills. Normal heart surgery was out of the question.
Harold was in a very similar position to Eppie. It had been hospitalized, it had numerous procedures, and they were unable to do their daily activities.
Luckily, Harold also qualified for the experimental procedure.
I told Harold that there was another person in the program and the two of them would be going through the process at about the same time. And I thought that it would be a good idea for them to get through this process together because it was new, it's never been done before at Hopkins, and it was pretty frightening, really, when you think that they're going to drill channels in a person's heart with a laser.
The two heart patients agreed to meet in the coffee shop of a local hotel.
I was nervous, and I'm a very shy person. I thought he was a kind man. He was very easy to talk to, and he made you not feel nervous. I liked his personality, and I sat back and listened.
What Epi learned was that Harold was also suffering from the loss of a relationship. His life had become a series of stressful, painful, and lonely days, and now he was facing a delicate, untested surgery.
I guess tomorrow's the day.
I've been through a lot of things, but I really didn't have any choice. I knew that I could not go on like I was living.
This brief meeting between two strangers, each with only one slim hope to live, would be the start of a miracle. The next day, both Harold and Epi underwent surgery. Each of their operations lasted over 6 hours, but miraculously, they both survived this dangerous experimental procedure. Barring any complications, they were sent home to recuperate, Epi to Delaware, Harold to Kentucky. But their bond continued to grow as they spoke to each other nightly.
We're two people who had the same thing in common, and she called me about her problems, and I would talk to her, and it went from there.
I was starting to feel different feelings for Harold at that time. It was a relief to have somebody else to talk to.
4 months later, Harold made an important decision.
Harold decided to come and visit in March, but before he come to visit, he sent me a dozen roses, red roses with one white rose in the center, which means I love you. And that made me nervous. Then I was like, okay, I haven't dated in 20 years now. What do I do now? We pulled into a parking lot, and we started talking, and very shortly, he kissed me. And I was very nervous. I was like a kid again. I haven't done that in a long time. One kiss, and I knew I was falling in love with him. I knew we were going to be together.
Epi and Harold returned to Johns Hopkins for their routine 6-month checkup, which turned out to be anything but routine. Harold surprised Epi with a heart-shaped engagement ring and a proposal of marriage.
Oh, Kathy, look at this. Oh my God, look at this diamond.
Harold just pulled out this ring and gave it to Epi right there in front of all of us working in the lab. And it was very exciting. Epi was absolutely thrilled by it.
He gave me the ring, and he asked me, would I marry him, and I said yes.
Even though they each had vowed never to remarry, Epi and Harold were wed just 2.5 months later. What started out as a cure for their diseased hearts miraculously ended up fixing their broken hearts as well.
They have not only improved their health, but they've found life partners, and to me that's a miracle.
The best thing that happened to me since this procedure is Harold Carmichael, because we're meant for one another, and we have new hearts, and we're going to conquer many things together.
We'll be back with more It's a Miracle right after this. That's our show for tonight.
But we'll be back next week with more true stories filled with motivation, mystery, and miracles. Until then, I'm Richard Thomas.
And I'm Nia Peoples. Good night.